Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday the 7th of April, and you are watching episode 1 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap is providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving voices to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me in this episode are my guest Jenny Hill, Mayor of Townsville City Council, a position she has held since 2012, and John Wharton, Mayor of Richmond Shire, who has held the position since 1997. Are you the longest serving mayor?
Yes, I am, Bill.
There's a record for us.
The rest of them are in jail.
No, I thought that only happened. Oh no, we've had some recently, haven't we?
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Okay, I'd just like to start off this evening and asking each of you in regards to what you did prior to your life as mayors of the your respective councils. If you can go first, John, and give us a bit of a rundown on your younger days and exuberant youth.
Oh, thanks, Bill. I guess, like most people that run for council, I had an issue with the Shire where they're putting a road out to my property. And the mayor at the time, Fred Tritton, who was also served for 32 years, said to me, well, if you know so much, Johnny, you stand for council. I said, I bloody will. Loading you bastards up. So when you get in there, though, you actually realise that you're needed by a lot of the people in the community, and you become a servant. And we do, like, we serve the people. I think all government serves people. So when you're elected by the people, doesn't matter whether you're local, state or federal, you become a member of the service industry. So, and you get a kick out of things so that you can deliver for them. And when you've got good councils that work with you, and you know, if every council has a few councillors that don't bring much to the table at all. You get to enjoy it, and I have enjoyed it. It's probably cost me a fair bit of money over the early years when we didn't get any money at all. But, you know, I've always served on race club committees and rodeo committees, and you serve in these communities when you're younger, and it's just an extension of that, really. And it's just a bigger events now. And so what we do now, we have our regional groups with, and like the Townsville, the Mount Isa corridor, and Jenny's in the room with us, and the Mount Isa mayor right through the corridor. And then we have our Northwest Regional Organisation Councils, which is all the Gulf councils. We all get together on a regular basis and talk about the big issues. And so, yeah, I suppose, you know, I got on there because I was angry about something that the council had done. And then you get to, I think once you start to deliver projects and deliver outcomes, and that's really important, I think, you've got to be delivering outcomes and be able to talk to the people as to why we're not doing this, because next year we'll do your little job, because that's when the budget will cover it, and that sort of thing. You need to talk to them about what's going on. And once you talk to people, they're usually pretty good. So, yeah, that'll probably do it for me.
Yeah. Well, just on that, I've had a requirement to ring you a couple of times throughout the last couple of years, and a good half of those times when I've rang you, you've been elsewhere other than in your Shire. You've been, you know, in Rockhampton or Brisbane or for different conventions, and also other commitments during time. I'm a little bit concerned sometimes for the people of Richmond that you have to be at so many places other than your own Shire.
Yeah, that's true. And right now I'm in Georgetown, and I just left a dinner to come over to the Georgetown Council offices and do this, because they've got a big ag forum here today, and I was one of the speakers about planning for development and economic growth, and it was a great little forum here in Georgetown for the Etheridge Shire. But yeah, look, they're my neighbours. I left to come up here yesterday, and we did the forum today, and I'll go home tomorrow. But we do, unfortunately, mayors nowadays, and Jenny will confirm this, that we do a lot more a lot more, I suppose, networking right across the regions, and I'm sure Jenny goes to Brisbane a lot more than I ever do, but we do have to do that, unfortunately, because I think it's just become part of our job. That's why you need a good CEO and a good council to keep the show rolling.
Okay, just move over to you Jenny.
Yeah.
I believe you come from born in Melbourne, actually. So you've made a big transition up to this side of the world. What brought you up, and how did you get into local government?
Well, Bill, what brought me up was the Australian Army, because I was engaged to a soldier. And what kept me here was the community. We decided that this was probably the best place to raise a family, and we stayed. We thought we'd only be here initially for 2, 3, 4 years, like a lot of people, and we ended up staying. And like you, John, once you get entwined in the community, local government sometimes seems like the next step. So my road into local government, so my background was a scientist. So I used to work for DPI, and some of the people out west would remember the BTEC program, BTB, eradication scheme.
Yep.
Then I went on to work for Queensland Health in human pathology, not animal pathology. And I spent 21 years there doing all sorts of things to humans legally. And in my spare time with the kids and that, I used to get involved in the school PNCs, the sporting clubs. And next thing you know, I had Tony Mooney asking me if I wanted to run for local government, and that was in 1997. So, John, when you became mayor, that's when I first entered local government. And it really has been a great, it's a great opportunity for anyone. If you really want to serve a community, I reckon local government's the best way to do it.
Okay, if I can move on now to the vast difference of what, if we go back when I was young, when most school was young, and had your local council, it was a fairly non-event in regards to, I don't think the elections were compulsory. There seemed to only be local businessmen and that jockeying for positions of mayor and a lot of people didn't take much interest. However, as you say, times have changed, and now we've got the situation where local government is a big business. I mean, you've got massive budgets in some councils, and one of the things I'm concerned about in regards to has been responsibilities devolved to local governments from the state government, and sometimes I wonder whether they've given you enough authority and funding to actually carry out those responsibilities. Do you find that is a bit of an issue in regards to the authority that you have, the responsibilities you have, and the funding to do what you're basically supposed to?
So, Jenny, you want to answer that?
Well, we could talk about funding inadequacies. I mean, there's no doubt that it's getting hard for local governments, and I think John would agree with me. Out west, trying to balance budgets isn't the easiest thing to do, and they're very reliant on funding, whether it's through the road maintenance contracts or Works for Queensland or the federal government, what we call the federal government assistance grants. You know, they really are important for keeping all local governments alive. Look, what I'd love is constitutional recognition for local government and a guarantee of 1% of taxation revenue to be distributed to all local governments. We've been fighting for that in the LGAQ, I think, for as long as I can remember, and we don't seem to get much support at a federal level. We get a bit of support through the state. Works for Queensland's been really good. John, I think for you guys the guys out west, untied grant funding really to be
Yep.
able to do what you need to do. Because otherwise grants are tied to certain projects, and more often than not, politicians want to cut the ribbon on new things, not help us fix up the stuff we currently have. Mate, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, so the financial assistance grants that Jenny just talked about were frozen back in 13 or 14 by Joe Hockey. And that was the start for us of going backwards. And we've, as Jenny just said, we've been arguing through the LGAQ to try to get that financial assistance grants back to 1%. It's about 0.05 now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the region we live in, from Townsville to Mount Isa, in 2016 was the highest GDP in the nation with regard to production. And I said to Joe Hockey one day when I was talking about this, and he said, "Oh, we'll look after it." I said, "Well, if you don't look after this corridor, you won't get any GDP. Everyone will go and live on the coast. And, you know, people out here in the bush need livability. They need everything else that's important to where we live. And we should be entitled to it. It's not a handout. It's given us back the GDP that we create." And so we really are pushing hard to get that 1% of GDP back, and that's an untied grant, and it comes and allows councils to spend the money in the region where they need to spend it, and that could be on numerous things. So,
well, just jump in there in regards to GDP, or especially GSP, there's gross state product. In regards to Queensland, the bulk actually comes from regional Queensland. Now, I know Brisbane and South East have got 3.5 million people, but the actual revenue, and especially foreign exchange revenue generated by regional Queensland, dwarfs anything the southeast corner does. And that goes right across Australia. I mean, in West Australia, you just only have to look at the iron ore exports. In Queensland, it's coal, agriculture, copper, and the other mining. They're the things that actually really contribute to the GSP. So, and we don't get enough recognition for that simply because we don't have the representation to sort of push our case. In regards to things that have made you happy in the last few accomplishments in the last few years, and things you're still gnawing your teeth over, John, can you give us a couple of examples?
well, I think I'm still gnawing my teeth over the financial assistance grants, because I had a one-to-one with Joe Hockey when this was going on, and you remember those times. And so that's probably you know, something that we really need badly, because some councils will go out the back door. When you've got communities and councils that have got a small population base, there's no return in putting your rates up. You can put your rates up 100% and it's going to be bugger all change. So your financial assistance grants help support that and helps keep your road crews in place, helps that development go on. So the FAGS grants are very, very important to rural and remote councils all over Australia. And probably not so important for a high population, but they're still important enough for a town like city like Townsville. Brisbane, probably not so much, but everybody should get it anyway. I don't have a problem with that. Probably the thing that has given me some pleasure and comfort, I suppose, is the way the federal and state government, particularly the federal government, came in after the floods in 2019. When we had that devastation and that disaster there, and Townsville was exactly the same, but we were 3 or 4 days later. And when we talked to the Prime Minister and the Premier every day, all they could do was ask what they can do to help us. And when they did help us, and it's turned our communities, the ones that were right in the centre of the floods, with lost a lot of cattle, it's turned those communities around, that support. It was quick, it was fast, and it stopped people doing self-harm, because they were going to do that. I had people all night ringing me about dead cattle around their house and everything, and that was their income. and they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't get out. They couldn't get out of the house. Couldn't get away. You know, the kids are at school. How are we going to pay for that? Blah blah blah. And the response was so swift and so well done that. And because he talked to us every night and the Premier every morning, what can we do? What can we do? And they responded. And I think that was very comforting to know that they responded to the Mayor's consultation, I guess. And I don't know, Jenny, to talk about Townsville, but that was the best thing that happened the last few years as far as we were concerned, was the quick response to protect our people.
Well, from our point of view, I mean, the biggest problem's been, like John said, funding for projects. So we haven't been in some ways we haven't been as lucky as some of our Western neighbours. We've got a thing called City Deal, and it's been good in terms of trying to get money for projects, but it's bad because it's lathered with bureaucracy. So that coming out of, and I recommend to anyone, don't think a city deal's the way to get money out of the federal government. When it was first designed, it sat under the Prime Minister, and I think in the last 7-8 years, we probably had 6 ministers since the demise of Malcolm Turnbull. So good idea, it could have worked really well for regional and even remote communities, but it's now just a bit of a sham around a way to get the funding to you. It's one of the ones that I gnaw my teeth around. One of the good things that I think we've achieved in council is just trying to get water and water security. We've got the money from the state, and we've got 2 lots of money for the state for water. We live in a very dry climate. We get about 3 months worth of rain, and then 9 months we'll see bugger all. And if we want this area to grow, we need to know we've got water security, and that funding, I think, will put Townsville in a really good position for the next 20 to 30 years.
It's been a long time coming, but hasn't it, really?
Oh, look, water's a big issue everywhere. I mean, if we could get people moving to places like Flinders with more jobs and things like that, because there is water there. It's probably more water there available to community than there is between Stanthorpe and Brisbane at the moment.
I think just before you had the floods, you're actually getting towards a dire situation with only about 8% storage capacity.
No, we had a bit more than that.
It was getting a bit close, wasn't it? For your liking?
Oh, we did have water restrictions, yeah. But look, you know, the dam filled 2.5 times, which is incredible. But
it's a feast or a famine.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the problem. But that's why the Burdekin Dam is so important, and the management of that. And it has, for us in the region, I think it's got a capability of being our main water supply well before up dead in the grave. I mean, it was a great piece of infrastructure between Bob Hawke and Joe Bielke-Peterson. But we don't see enough of that anymore. And that, I think, is a real problem for developing the regions.
Yeah, I think that was our last real big-scale major dam, especially anywhere near that capacity. But that was I think that was about 1986 it got a Guernsey, or was finished in 86.
About 85, I think it finally got the Guernsey. And it's a bit of a funny story because Paul Keating was the Minister for Northern Australia in the dying days of the Whitlam government. And when he was Treasurer, Whitlam, when he first got elected.
That's going back to the 70s.
75. So when he got elected in 83 as the Treasurer, he actually understood the project, which I think is why they gave a commitment to fund it and they went through with it. And we saw a lot of development up here. And John, I don't know if you remembered coming into Townsville, but we used to have a lot of federal government headquarters and that here. In the last probably 15, 20 years, it's disappeared. But prior to that, we had one of the biggest tax offices in Australia. We had a lot of departments were co-located in Townsville. They had offices here, so you could talk to people here rather than having to go to Canberra. But all that's changed. Everything's been centralised. And if you want to get a decision, you've got to fly back and forth either to Brisbane or Canberra.
I'd just like to share a screen at the moment. It's just a comparison between Townsville and Richmond to give viewers an idea where we're talking about and scale of difference between the two locations. Here we go. Up there at the moment, we've got a map of basically North Queensland, and we've got Townsville on the coast and Richmond somewhere in the middle. So one's a major inland facility, and Townsville's actually would be really called the major servicing hub for North Queensland. Like Cairns would be the major servicing hub for our North Queensland.
Yep.
Now, just to scroll down and just to give a bit of a comparison, things that are happening, and I'm sorry for your situation, John. You've got 3,300 square kilometres of area, and only got to put your population is heading downwards, which is a bit of a worry. And actually, I think Benny's workforce is bigger than your total population.
Well, yeah, it would be.
Yeah. Sorry, John.
Oh,
and
let's
then
about that.
Well, the most concerning thing is the downward trend. We need drastically to reverse that. And then we have Townsville, and that you got the same areas in square kilometres roughly. However, Benny, you don't have to supply a lot of infrastructure for the sea area that's allocated to you. You don't have to put roads out into the Pacific Ocean. So your actual land mass is significant, at least half as much as John Shire. But
I got to tell you, I've got people on
I don't really
magnetic.
know Oh, you got Magnetic Island and Palm Island.
No, we don't have
There's
palm.
no roads going out 100.
We have magnetic. We don't have palm, and I've got people who would love me to build a road from West Point to Paloranda. So
Townsville's in the Townsville State Electric includes Palm Island, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. Just the state electorate, not the local government.
But not you. Okay, that's standalone.
Yep.
Okay, so your population's been going up rather well. So and hopefully we get some more growth, but unfortunately it's been well outpaced by southeast Queensland. Okay, I'll stop that share now. So that just gives viewers a bit of an understanding where you're located, your size and your population issues. Now, one of the things I'm concerned about is the authority that's been passed over to from the state governments and to local governments, especially in regards to planning. We forever seem to have situations where a council gets the application for a major project, major building or something, and then local population has an issue with it and objects to it, and council sides with the ratepayers and ends up in dispute with the developers and heads off to an expensive battle. And that's happened in a couple of, I think Cassowary Shires was one of the most recent ones. Do you think there needs to be a demarcation or authority arrangement in regards to these planning issues where we don't get into a situation where we end up in the courts and the ratepayers hit with a hefty bill? Is there a bit more need for councils to be a bit more circumspect and say, just let the ratepayers know we're not going to win this, and just cut our losses rather than go through the expensive procedure.
Well, as you can see by your graph there, planning's not a real big issue out here. So I'll let Jenny answer that.
Oh, thanks, John. Bill, you never know what's going to happen in a court, and you never know what argument they're likely to agree with. We had a big expensive appeal that we took on, that if we didn't win the appeal, it was going to cost the ratepayers millions, and I mean millions. We won the appeal, and we're able to protect future, how can I put it, future development. We can keep it now a little more compact, and it's going to save the ratepayers millions of dollars, because every time we set up little satellite developments, the cost of getting the infrastructure back and forth is really expensive. Now, sometimes you've got to take these battles on, even when you might think they lose them, because sure enough, you're likely to win. And it's really hard to say, no, not do it, especially if you have sided with residents and you have gone against, well, if the professional officers have agreed with the residents, and then the applicant decides to take you to court, sometimes you've got to take the fight up. Otherwise, community loses faith in you, that you're actually there to support the community.
Okay. John's got to do a runner in a minute, but I'll just put up one screen before he goes, so I can just ask him a little question. This screen is about the support of local government for North Queensland State. This goes back to 2010, when the North Queensland Local Government Association meeting, I think it was in Carpentaria or somewhere like that, 98 of the 100 delegates voted in favour of a motion for a North Queensland state. Now, John, you took the issue down to the Local Government Association of Queensland and moved the motion. Unfortunately, it was lost. But there again, we do have a strange, I'll just turn that off. So you remember that incident?
Yeah, I remember that very well. We actually took that motion to the state conference in Mackay. That was 2010, I think.
Yep.
And as you'd be aware, the big councils in the southeast have 20 votes, and we have 2. I think Townsville has 6. Have you right, Jenny? And,
8.
Yeah, but then you would have had 6 then, probably.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with Wharton, they would have had 14, and Jenny would know the figures better than me, but Brisbane City had 20.
Yeah.
So we put that up at the Mackay State Conference. And I'll tell you what, we nearly got it. It nearly went through. Not that we were sending a message. We were sending a message that we need to be recognised for what we contribute. And basically it's Northern Australia thing, North Queensland. But we were trying to send a message, but it got very close. I think it was only about 10 votes in it. And everyone in the southeast just put on a show and really jumped up and down and made a lot of noise. However, we still support that principle because our government is too far away, Bill. Yeah. And that's your local government. You can talk to a councillor, you can go to the local council office and get your stuff sorted. This is why vans like us are away a lot, because we have to travel down south to go and talk to the government in Brisbane. And for councils out in Western Queensland, it's a week out of you. So you'll catch a plane or you'll drive to Townsville, catch a plane. So there's a day, you get down there, you do the business, you come back and you drive home again. So there's another 5 or 6 hours of driving. So you've got 3 days out of your week. It's not so bad when you're on the coast, you can jump on a plane and slip down there, but we've still got to do it. We've still got to go and, so that's why I've always supported a closer government, a government for the people. And we've got strong arguments about, the negative people about the North Queensland state say, well, you can't afford it. we can't afford not to have it. And as I said before, the GDP on the Townsville Mount Isa corridor and the Townsville port is huge. And we wouldn't need to have such a big government either. You know, we could eliminate a lot of politicians because they're all in a lot of them are in Brisbane, southeast. So I'm still a strong supporter of North Queensland State.
Yeah.
We've got I think we've got at least 73 state members within 250 kilometres of Brisbane, and we have only 17 in Central and North Queensland in total. Now that since the days of what they used to call the Bianchi Manda, or what was actually a period of malapportionment voting, and before places like the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast really got built up, we had a situation where out your way, John, there was only 5,000 voters in the state electorate. In Townsville, there was probably around about 10. And down, we had situations where I think the worst case was, I think Flinders had 4,800 voters, and at the same time, Mount Gravatt down in the southeast had 22,000 voters. Now, that's a bit of a distortion in the thing, but that was the heyday of regional development. That was the day when people went down to Brisbane, and more than half of the politicians there came from regional centres, from the Darling Downs to the far north Queensland, out west, because we had all these small seats. And that's the time when Cairns got its international airport, and we got a lot of development. So after the Fitzgerald Quarry, we went back to one person, one vote, one vote, one value, and that's gradually, as the southeast corners built up, we've got the situation where we're overwhelmed by the sheer numbers down there. And I'm sorry to say, in regards to some of our representatives who go down to Brisbane, they seem to be well trained as cliché parrots, just to give us a lecture on what Brisbane wants us to do. And I think John will sort of grimace in regards to the mandate for masks at the moment, sort of thing. We just don't understand why we're doing it, but we're all in it together, and I think that's the general saying. But I don't really want to be in it anymore.
Well, I argue I understand the masks, and you do need them, and the reasons why under public health, because that was something I'd studied in another life. But if you want to talk about regional development, the North Queensland region of councils, the old what was it, John? The one we had the North Queensland Alliance in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah, from Mackay.
North Queensland Local Government Association.
Yep,
I think it was. It's now morphed into Council of Mayors for Regional Queensland, and we're meeting on a regular basis. And look, I've got to tell you that at the moment, the thing that we're concerned about, or I am personally, and I'll take it to my colleagues, is things like the Olympic Games. If you want to put a wedge between southeast Queensland and the rest of Queensland, it really is the Olympic Games, because there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to be spent that all of us are asking, what's that going to cost us? What's it going to cost us in grants? What's it going to cost us in funding for roads? How the hell are they going to spend that in the southeast corner? And I think for us, we've got a battle that, as John said, it's not just the government down there, it's the southeast corner, the Council of Mayors there that are very powerful. They're well organised. They're in the ears of the not just the state, but also the federal government, because they can fly very easily out of Brisbane to Canberra. They can be in Brisbane and they can be out of Brisbane in Canberra in the morning, back that night. Whereas for someone like John or myself, it's at least, for me, it's a 2-day trip, easily, 2 nights. So we've got to work together as a group and as a region if we want to get our voices heard. And that's why, for me now, the Council of Mayors Regional Queensland, we've got to develop that into a strong body, because if we don't, that southeast corner will continue to cut us at the legs. They've gotten their way with Works for Queensland. God knows how many hundreds and hundreds of millions are going to demand now for the Olympics.
I think the other thing to really worry about, I'm just waiting on the figures now from Cummings Economics, is the population growth over the last 4 years. And we have to look forward to, in about 2023, with that increased population in the southeast corner, we'll be going to a electoral boundary review. And on the forecast, going back immediately after the last redistribution, the review was in 2016, and the actual redrawing the boundaries took effect in 2017. It basically allowed for an increase from the 2008 redistribution of 400,000 additional voters. Forecast by 2024, between 2016 and 2024, the forecast is for 560,000 voters. Now, I don't know what COVID's going to make in that, or it actually might enhance it, because we might get more people from Southern Australia coming up. So we're going to be faced with a situation where they either get more seats and we barely hold on. So that's something we've got to worry about. John wants to break away now. If you need to go, John, we'll let you go, but if you can stay a few bit.
Yeah, look, I better go, Bill.
Okay, look, I thank you very much for your participation. I'll be in contact with you tomorrow, and I'll probably get you back on another show, hopefully with a grazier or a business person from your area to discuss things that you need, because I remember coming through Richmond in 2017, stopping at the Fossil Museum, stopping at having a cake at the, is it Moonscape? Moonrock Cafe, and speaking to the counter staff there, they were somewhat a bit bitter on the fact that they could no longer make their own bread for sandwiches because the electricity charges had gone up so much. While they could get the margin in cakes, couldn't make the margin on making bread. So it was tip top. I think they had to bring out from under the counter to make sandwiches. So they're the things, I suppose, your area is faced with all the time, increased pricing like that. And I'm sure all agricultural areas, cane farmers and that, are faced with the same problem of rising electricity prices. But I look forward to getting you back on another show, hopefully with one of your business people from your area.
Thanks, Bill. And thank you, Jenny, for carrying on the good work there with sorry to leave you.
Typical John, love us and leave us. See you, mate.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Rightio. Good night, John.
Good night.
Okay, Jenny, we'll move straight on to one of my little questions. It really didn't probably affect John's region so much, but in recent years, council elections have become more politicised with party politics. As a young person, I don't think I ever saw it, and I mean, I never really took much notice of local elections. Certainly didn't vote in them until it was compulsory. So now that changed, that it's all under the, we're all registered under the Electoral Commission, and the voting in council elections, local government elections is compulsory. Was that the start of the politicisation, or did it start long before that and people like I were just not aware of it?
Well, I think years ago you had Labor and Liberal teams running in Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, Rocky, as well as Brisbane and Logan and places like that. The only place now you see politicisation of councils is Brisbane, where you have actual Labor endorsed and Liberal endorsed teams. So I think it's actually moved a bit further away than that. You do get people who are members or have been members of political parties who suddenly cancel their membership and claim, I'm running as an independent. I think that's being a bit disingenuous doing that. If you are in in a party, say so. If you're not, that's fine. But be honest with everyone. It doesn't mean people aren't going to vote for you, but it does mean you're prepared to make a stand on certain issues. And I think that's really important in local government. And to be able to take anyone on, Labor, Liberal, at a state or federal level, you want people who are prepared to have a go and do the best for their region. And I think that's what's really important.
I think that's one of the most important things in regards to a councillor, they're standing up for the community rather than particular ideologies. I think it's a fairly sad situation where people vote for a councillor on the basis of ideology in regards to, an issue like climate change, or whether they support Israel or they want to ban Israel. Like we've got the situation in Sydney City Council, with massive council, where they openly have programs where they, I think it's BDS, I think the code is for it, but it basically don't buy any Israeli products or having that's fairly concerning. I think if we migrate to that sort of situation where those sort of ideologies come into the selection of your local councillor rather than the community spirit.
I know, but the problem is the Local Government Act varies from state to state. I'd argue that in Queensland, you've got strong local governments. You've got guys like John Wharton or Jane McNamara, Phil Kerr down in Julia Creek. You've got, and Frank Beveridge, you've got strong local government because the legislation in Queensland means that we have so many more responsibilities than they do in a place like Sydney. I mean, the best thing that could happen in Sydney is you amalgamate all those tiny councils, which they are in area, and you create a proper council like you have in Brisbane. Whether you like it or not, Brisbane, Logan, Moreton, Sunny Coast, you've got 4 major councils there that probably look after 2.5, 3 million people. In Sydney, you've probably got 30 to 40 doing the same job. So instead of actually doing a good job in their area, they get involved in all these stupid little things that in the end don't mean an awful lot to the majority of voters. And council's not respected.
In Australia, we've got about 535 local government areas. It's a lot of government areas, but we've had instances both in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, to amalgamate council to sort of an economy of scale, basically, in a lot of areas. So, like you say, I remember being in Melbourne, and we had the St Kilda Council, and then right next door, just 3 or 4 streets away, there was the Moorabbin Council, and all. It was amazing. But then it did make a move to amalgamate some of those, and that did stick. But then other instances, like we've had in Queensland, we had the amalgamation, and there's a lot of noses out of joint, and I suggest there's still a lot of noses out of joint, even though under the Newman government, he allowed them to amalgamate at their own expense. And I expect the people who still have their nose out of joint are those wanted to amalgamate, but because of the impost of the financing that they had to bear the cost of the deamalgamation, they couldn't do it. And some were even more upset because when they amalgamated, they actually had money in the bank, was thrown into the pot of the larger council, and they were never entitled to get that back. So I think there's
you had a few that deamalgamated. Port Douglas from Cairns. You had Livingston
Mareeba.
and Rockhampton, Mareeba, and you also had Noosa, Atherton. So they all deamalgamated out of the thing. But I'd argue that for Townsville, the best thing that could have happened was Thuringowa and Townsville amalgamating, because all you had there were 2 cities competing against each other. And when it comes to trying to get stuff done, that wasn't helpful. It was not helpful for the rest of the community.
There's definitely a case for amalgamation to get the scales of economy right and get the direction is pulling together rather than pulling apart. There's cases for that, but we still have this situation where there's a lot of opposition, and that was to it by the general public because they just have their little quirky ways and differences. And we saw the same thing in New South Wales only a couple of years ago with the forced amalgamations there. Basically, as a result, the National Party supporting those amalgamations lost ground in regional New South Wales to the Shooters and Fishers Party. And I think, and also supporting the Liberals' ban on dog racing didn't help them either. So you can make some pretty bad decisions when you're looking after regions. I mean, your prime job for the Nationals is supposed to look after your regions, but when you get too tied to that capital city orchestra down there, you can make very bad judgments in regards to your real constituent. What
you need though for some of our regions is you want to grow their population. You put up a really good slide about what was happening in Richmond, their population decline. They're the sort of things that need to be reversed, where you either have to push industry into these regions to get them to grow, or create an environment where businesses can operate out of those regions more efficiently. Because at the moment, you've got the big centres of Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, and they are drawing particularly a lot of young people to live there. So to help, there's got to be a smarter way that we can help people outside or regions outside of the southeast corner to get industry back there, or to get even government departments back there.
I think it's always basically the government's got to set the framework that allows business to get on with what they're good at, and there's growing business and making profits. But I think there's a lot of cases where government tries to get involved and pick winners and sort of provide subsidies for one lot of industries to the detriment of others. So what we need is a good solid framework that allows any sort of entrepreneur or business to make headway.
It could be framework, but and the Constitution's a problem in this case. All my machines are beeping me at the moment. In countries like in Asia, they'll create economic zones where they want people to move to and provide a framework for businesses to be able to grow. In America, they will give subsidies to move into rural areas. And for example, they've encouraged a lot of their data centres, which are high value jobs, to move into regional and rural areas. We don't see that happening in Australia. The Constitution, I keep getting told that we can't provide those sort of incentives because the Constitution doesn't allow it. Now, is that the real problem, or is the problem really around ability of government to think outside the box and find a solution? Because at the moment, NAPE's not cutting it.
I think it's only spent 5 cents in the dollar, or committed 5 cents in the dollar for it's $5 billion. I think the greatest outcome for that organisation is for the public servants who run it. I mean, it's a number of people getting a massive wage or not much output at the moment, and that's always concerning when government gets involved in a lot of things. Its productivity falls short, and that is definitely one case. Just the seeing we're talking about Constitution, and I'll just flip up another screen. This screen, we're just talking about 3 decades since the last referendum on local government, And considering the increase in profile of local government, it's now time to seek constitutional recognition and direct funding from the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
There's two past referendums, one in 74 and one in 88. Now, the interesting thing about these two referendums, they were brought to the fore under Labor governments. One would have been under Whitlam, the other one would have been probably the end of the Hawke-Keating era, just before Keating took the prime ministership. First, in 74, the question was to enact to alter the Constitution to enable the Commonwealth to borrow money for and to grant financial assistance to local government bodies. It was lost in all states except New South Wales, and the national vote was 47% in favour. In 88, was basically the Constitution recognises the federal and state levels of government, but makes no mention of local government. It sought all of the Constitution to recognise local governments. Now, this was lost in all states, and only 33% voted in favour. It was the biggest no vote of any referendum we've held in this country.
Yeah. So
again, it's been over 30 years, and things have changed. Do you think there's any possibility of some advocacy for doing something like that again?
there is. I mean, we try all the time through the Local Government Association of Queensland, but the biggest problem for us in terms of getting being seen as a mature level of government is, like you described, what happened in Sydney. Other states don't have a maturity around their local government the way we do in Queensland. So you've got very small councils that don't have either the asset base or the ability to really manage planning and things like that, and they get involved in all these side issues. The only way I think we'll get constitutional recognition is if we had a local government laws around all the states of Australia that were fairly similar, and I think similar to Queensland, or that you tied funding to amalgamation of councils, particularly in places like Sydney and Melbourne. At the moment, you have these small councils that go off on these fringe issues, and people down there don't trust them. So if you were to ask for constitutional recognition of local government, people think in those areas particularly, they're nothing but a joke. So until local government itself matures, it's going to be very hard to convince the rest of the voting public in Australia that we should have constitutional recognition. Now, that's just my opinion.
So moving on to another thing, councils these days with their budgets are fairly substantial, having more than 1,000 employees and a lot of responsibilities. You've got the superannuation commitments and the infrastructure commitments, and there's borrowings, of course. Now, when sort of what authority does a council's operator under to borrow money? Is there an approvals process that allows you to do so much by the state government? And is that sort of, there's enough control mechanism there to stop the situation like we had in New South Wales just this last 6 months or so? Central Coast Council down there, I think they got into nearly $600 million worth of debt. I'm not familiar with what happened in New South Wales. In Queensland, as I said, the Local Government Act is quite strict. If we have to borrow money, we've got to get approval through Queensland Treasury. Every year, Queensland Treasury goes back and has a look, well, they do with us at our books, and I have no doubt they check
all the books of local government in terms of what their borrowing capacity is and their ability to pay. At the moment, I think we're running at about 8% of our asset base. In fact, it might be dropping in terms of the value of our loans to our ability to borrow. We keep getting approvals. We can borrow a lot more from Queensland Treasury. In fact, they've said to us, if we want to borrow, now's a good time because interest rates are pretty good. They're very low. You basically only have to pay back principal plus just over 1%. Smart councils don't do that. You don't borrow for the sake of borrowing. And to get approval to borrow, they want to see exactly what you're going to spend your money on. So for us, it's routinely areas such as water and wastewater, because they're our biggest costs at council. And because of the regulation, particularly around wastewater, because we're on the reef, we've got an added responsibility. So you will not find, I don't think you'll find a council in Queensland that would be allowed to borrow beyond its means. It has to be signed off by the minister, and they have to get approval through Queensland Treasury.
But it does sometimes become a bit of a battering point by some opponents to councils in general, because you've always got groups in your community who want to give you a good whack. And one of the things, the level of debt's gone up over the years. We never had. But do you think there needs to be maybe more education in regards to the general ratepayers in regards to we get our rate notice in cans, and attached to that is a sort of newsletter. But really, it's so small. I mean, I wear glasses anyway, but then I still have to get a magnifying glass to actually decipher it and read it. But it's sort of general mishmash, but there's not the real education in that. They should probably send out a newsletter with 3 or 4 pages and with a quite constructive thing in regards to a graph of our debt, where it was and how we're managing it, so people feel comfortable. And so when people like the Ratepayers Association takes it back to you, most people would realise, well, that's not really right, because we know and we're informed that our funds are being managed, and we are in a situation where the ratepayers are fairly well protected in regards to borrowings, and we're also getting assets for our borrowings, rather than we're not really borrowing just to meet operating expenses, because that would be a major concern if you have to actually.
Yeah, that's right. You're not allowed to borrow for operating expenses. Yeah. You can't, but you're right. I mean, a person can go out and have 10% deposit and borrow 90% for a house. We can't do that in local government. I think there are limits to what you can do, and it's all based around your assets and your revenue. Look, in the past, we borrowed money at fixed interest rates, and they're very, very high. I think the average rates at council at the moment is around about 7.5% in terms of our loans. So we haven't borrowed, we've paid down a lot of our loans, and the next couple of years we're going to pay out a lot of our loans. But that'll give us the flexibility then, if there's a big project that we need money for, especially if it stays as what they're predicting at about just over 1%, gives us the opportunity to maybe do a big lot of renewals in our capital program that will minimise then the impact on our ratepayers. And that's really what we're looking for in Cairns or Mackay or in Rocky or even in Richmond. If you're going to borrow money, it's about trying to minimise the impact on your ratepayers.
I suppose another thing, a lot of people, a lot of time there's a project and it comes with a fairly large price tag, and some people just don't see the value in money for a lot of things. You know, like
Yeah.
is it so expensive in Australia? Like kilometre road, you know, it's astronomical. I think it's runs around about $10 million plus for a kilometre of just one lane each way basic road in regional Queensland. So we just don't comprehend. Are we sure we're getting value, and how can that be explained to the public that these costs are just something we have to deal with, and we're not being ripped off? And maybe the story, or it has to be more information to the ratepayers and the general public for the value for money we are getting.
Well, you look at, you talk about value for money. So the Bruce Highway, we've got we needed a bridge to be fixed and a portion of road. To do that, the way the engineers have designed it now, it's well over $500 million. Now, I don't know how we're going to get value for money for that, but that's a thing between the state and federal government. In councils, we look for different ways to do things. So we might put a chip seal on a dirt road rather than do a reconstruction and a new bitumen seal, because there's not that many cars who run on it. So what we try and do is, this is where you do things like traffic counts. You determine what's the average use of the road. Do you need to, can you keep it as a dirt road? Is it more practical to keep it as a dirt road? If not, do you put just a chip seal on it to keep the dust down? Do you go with an asphalt seal? There's all these things you've got to consider, and you've got to try and make it value for money. There's no value for money to spend $10 million if you've only got 4 houses in a 2-kilometre stretch. Now, I keep telling my councillors that we're not going to build a road for a 2-kilometre road for four houses. It's just not feasible. But in other areas, you know, you're going to have to, you do your road maintenance, you map it out, and you try and keep up with it. And it's getting harder and harder for everyone, you know, to make sure that you just keep up with the basics and provide value for money for residents.
Well, it's just gone over the hour, Jenny. I'd like to wrap it up there. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated. Your support for a separate state is also greatly appreciated. And I hope we see you soon on one of our visits down to Townsville. That's
fine, Bill. Have a good night.
Right, thanks very much. Right, we're wrapping up tonight. So for those watching, we'd like you to share, friend, and post this podcast. So again, I'd like to thank our guests. It's been a great, wonderful first episode, and next week we'll be back with our second episode, and hopefully we'll have talked a geologist, a notable North Queensland geologist, to join us for a conversation. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Good night.